Hi, this is the video for Daf Shevui, Daf Mem Bet of Masechet Ketubot, page 42. And I wanted to teach a little interesting tidbit on a story that comes up sort of derech agav, in passing, on this sugya. And that's where Rava says, Hi Milta, this matter, Kasha ba Rabba v'Rav Yosef esrim v'tartin shana. Was difficult for Rabba and Rav Yosef for 22 years. Wow, that's quite a long time to sit on this difficulty. V'lo yiprak, and they didn't solve it. Adiyati Rav Yosef bereishia uparke, until Rav Yosef sat at the head, which we usually read to mean sat at the head of the academy, and solved the kushya. So what's the deal with all this 22 years where Rav Yosef evidently did not get to be the Rosh Yeshiva, and maybe we could hear in between the lines that Rabbah was the Rosh Yeshiva? And that is indeed what Rashi says. Rashi says that the 22 years were the days that Rabbah ruled the academy as the Rosh Yeshiva, and then he died, and Rav Yosef sat in the head of the Rosh Yeshiva. And now here's where Rashi adds in a little bit of interesting tidbits on his own. And they helped him from the heavens, meaning he received help from the heavens as soon as he became the Rosh Yeshiva. That's why he was able to all of a sudden solve this difficulty, to resolve it, in order to give him a good name. Right? In other words, Rabbah, who'd been this great Rosh Yeshiva, who'd sat there for 22 years, who'd been the Rosh Yeshiva, all of a sudden Rav Yosef ascends and takes his job, and he needs a little bit of help so that people will submit to his authority, will view him as a great scholar. So God, the heavens, provides him with an answer to this thorny question they've been asking about in the yeshiva for 22 years. Now, why did he need this extra help? Rashi points out that Rabbah was sharp. He was charif. And that's why they called him an uprooter of mountains. And this alludes to an agada I'll read for you in a moment. But Rav Yosef was somebody who had a great mastery of a quantity of material, was a great memorizer, right? And that's why they called him Sinai. So what we actually see over here, Rashi points out, is something a bit unusual. Here we have a case where Rabbah, who was sharp, who could solve difficulties, couldn't solve this difficulty while he was alive. But Rav Yosef could, even though Rav Yosef is known as somebody who has a great memory, but is not able to really solve difficult dialectical problems. And this alludes to a famous agada in Brachot 64a, which I'll read to you a little bit quickly, where it's talked about Rabbah and Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef was Sinai. He had great memory. And Rav Yosef could uproot mountains. A very interesting image that Rav Yosef is the source of Torah, this mountain of Sinai. But Rabbah is even greater, for Rabbah can uproot mountains. Itztaricha lehusha. They needed one of them to become the Rosh Yeshiva. And they sent there, meaning in Babylonia, they sent to Eretz Israel, to the land of Israel, someone who's a Sinai, a great memorizer, and someone who is an uprooter of mountains, a great dialectical ability. Who comes first? And the answer there is, in Eretz Israel, Sinai comes first, because everybody needs the one who owns the wheat. In other words, if you don't have the basic level of knowledge of the sources, then the dialectical acumen to analyze them and raise difficulties on them and sharpen them doesn't make a difference. And that's an interesting educational philosophy that I'll get back to in a second. But Rav Yosef says, no, I don't want to be Rosh Yeshiva, because the magicians had said to him, you're going to be Rosh Yeshiva for only 2 years, and then you're going to die. So Rabbah became Rosh Yeshiva for 22 years, and then Rav Yosef became Rosh Yeshiva only for 2.5 years, and then he died. And what's interesting is, really, in the Babylonian Talmud, this is an Eretz Israeli, an Israeli answer. In the Babylonian Talmud, there is a clear preference for acumen over memorizational ability. And consistently, the Babylonian Talmud portrays the land of Israel as a place where they value memorization, but they portray themselves as being at a greater level and and emphasizing the acumen, the ability to raise difficulties on somebody, the ability to raise to solve difficulties, the ability to notice when two sources that seem to agree with each other actually disagree with each other. You can feel that on almost every page of the Bavli, that what they celebrate is this intellectual ability to raise difficulties and solve them, all this endless dialectics, which really continues in Jewish history with the Tosafot, who also continue to raise difficulties and solve them, and that the ability to memorize something, this pure ability to memorize something, is a little bit lessened, although they, of course, admit that in the end, if you don't know your sources, then what value is it, the ability to raise difficulties on them? And to this day, I would argue that in the yeshiva world, what's really celebrated is not memory, but is sharpness, acumen, dialectical ability. That's really what is celebrated, I think, to this day as a legacy of the Babylonian Talmud and a legacy of the medieval commentators, the Tosafot.